Well, it's an absolute privilege to have you with us today, Grant, at the International Journal of Esports. Can you please tell me a bit about yourself?
Hi there. I'm Grant Rousseau. I'm currently the head of operations for a esports organization called EXCEL Esports, who are one of the biggest esports orgs in the UK. And yeah, I've been in esports for sort of 4 or 5 years now, just bouncing around here and there. And but yeah, all settled in the UK with EXCEL and helping them drive forward in the esports market.
So I know you've already told me, I've had the privilege of meeting you before, but for our audience, can you tell us a bit about what you do on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis for Excel?
Sure. So on the non-fancy side, it's very much your sort of standard operations role, right? So it's continuous improvement of the company. That's long-term projects that could be anything from, say, internal communications and messaging systems, or it could be style in which we work, or helping create new facilities. Very much sort of open-ended project work. And then day to day, again, as is operations for a startup, it's very much kind of ensuring the company makes it through to the next day, putting out any fires that they're the nature of a startup is one day I'm paying bills, the next day I'm building a bed for one of our new facilities. It can be very varied. It's very much just kind of fighting day to day for a startup. But that's the non-fancy side. The reason people do this for esports rather than say any other generic startup is, of course, the performance side. So I'm lucky enough to work with our performance team. In the past, that has meant as a long-term project, building the performance department, getting players, getting staff, building out sort of a plan of how we're going to take our performance department forward, an ethos, and day to day that may be meaning with the team, helping them work, helping them play, managing them, as it were, not coaching, but managing. So that's the more fun side. But it is, end of the day, it's a fairly standard sort of operation startup job.
Obviously, Worlds is finished now. What's going on at Excel these days? Is it get more stressful? Is it less stressful?
Yeah, so as an ops guy, I hate off season because it's always the most stressful. You think it'd be on season, but actually in the on season, people are playing and you're kind of going very much day to day and it's manageable. Whereas off season, this is where we can now do all our new projects. So whether that is changing or introducing something to the team, but of course the company as a whole is the perfect time to, I don't know, do any updates to a website, or you will have seen very recently we've just done a big rebrand. Different logo, different website, different ethos, new merchandise, new shop, new logistics systems, a hell of a lot that's got into the last sort of 3 to 4 months, but it very much comes through in the off season. So it is your opportunity to launch anything that's been bought through. It's your opportunity to produce anything you've been working on creating, your opportunity to change the performance teams. Off season is very much where it's at for operations.
Okay, so very, very broad base. Because you're involved in so many different things, what would you say is your ambition? What's the grant proposal for Excel? What's your dream?
That's a really good question. So my passion, my dream has always been this, and it's part of the reason I'm at Excel right now. I want to build up UK esports to be a extremely relevant, extremely positive industry, I guess, for the UK. That is, that it's something that's recognised on a government level, that it's, producing economic benefits to the country, but on another level, it's something for young teenagers and young adults to engage with, to make them smile, to have something to connect with. I think esports at its base is entertainment, right? It's just like normal sport, and there's a lot of kids out there and a lot of teenagers out there who see gaming and see esports as a way to, whether it's escape or a way to connect with friends or a way to support something and have fandom for something. I'd love to just make that bigger and bigger and give something for people to smile about that, and specifically with the UK, where in my opinion, unfortunately, the UK esports is a bit behind the rest of Europe and America right now. So very much wanting to work on that, and right now that means working with EXCEL Esports, which is a large organization in the UK, and making them relevant and making them big and well known, such that again we have something for fans to follow, and that's the first step, and through them take the industry to a more serious level.
Okay, can you give us a teaser or something specific that you're thinking about there?
I guess it's not really a teaser, but it's more just like if we start winning some matches, that's always a good way to make people smile. That's a great one. Maybe having the best team around and working directly with an organization, it tends to boil down to, like any sports team, winning games, having a good performance team, right? That's what people connect with. And for now, that's where I like to work and have a connection with. And through my aspect of making the operation side of the company as good as possible, that may affect the performance side by a few percent, which is what matters at this level. And maybe in the future, I will branch out into other opportunities, other roles, etc. That again hit that sort of different ways to raise the UK sports. But for now, it's to win some games.
What do you think has been the biggest struggle so far?
For EXCEL or for me?
Both.
I'll start with EXCEL. The UK esports market had a few sort of prevalent, well-known teams that have kind of branched out into more global setup and European setups because, to be financially viable and to do well, you need to have success outside the UK, right? Because the UK esports market isn't that big. It's not got a lot of eyes on it. You can't survive off it alone. What EXCEL I think found difficult was that they were a fairly new organization. They're about 5 or 6 years old overall, but sort of at a professional level, they're probably only about 2 years old, in terms of actual funding coming through and getting them going.
Sure.
And there has been, I think, difficulty to connect on the more European market. What I think they've done well is broken into the UK market and really made the name as this bold British esports organization. But what we found is, hey, we want to build the UK, and be the leader of that as a result. And that didn't turn out to be as easy as possible, getting people to turn eyes to it, changing the education, say, of parents or teachers or whoever it is to understand that this is a useful, good thing. Changing people's minds to the fact that esports can be a positive thing, and gaming in general, right? That gaming can be a positive thing. I guess so. I've kind of taken a path there, but it's gone down to sort of changing perceptions in the UK, which is of course of benefit to EXCEL Esports because it makes us more prevalent. That's probably been the difficult task I've noticed, but it's getting there day by day. I think we had hoped it'd be a bit quicker than it has been.
And then for yourself?
There's definitely a few. I'm trying to think of a more important one. Let's say, for me personally, it's been a hell of a journey. I've been to 4 different organizations in about 5 years. Lived in 7 different houses over 3 different countries and 6 different locations in that time. So stability, definitely not the key word. That's the nature of sports, right? I was very much on the performance side when I started, and I've transitioned into the operations side, which is more my background. And you're having to make that break into the industry, right? It's an industry a lot of people want to get into, and you have to kind of sacrifice a lot to break in. And for me personally, the toughest thing was sort of understanding that grind that I needed to do to break into a very competitive industry. Starting off, God, it was back in January 2016. Now I was living in LA, in the middle of nowhere of LA, so not the nice part. With a new team, earning extremely little, just sitting in a bedroom that they provided, training the team every day. And very much having no friends, no social life, no anything, just train every day. And committing to that and going with it even when it didn't work, and that's a big part of that, which I've tried to be public about. But I know the big reason I joined EXCEL is my own personal mental health and physical health as well, right? Maintaining that despite all this movement, traveling, everything, that I maintain good social circles, stay strong in my own mind, and make sure I'm learning the whole way through. And there's definitely been testing times of that, but it's all been worth it. And now I'm settled down here with EXCEL. It's all come through in a positive light.
This leads on to what I hear a lot about, which is a lot of people want to get into esports. Everyone has their own journey on how they got there, if they got there. And the bit I find tricky is, how do we encourage the current generation to get these careers? Because everyone's got their own journey. So you can't say, oh, I recommend this course, or I recommend talking to that person. It just doesn't work. What would you recommend or advise to people?
Well, here's the good news: is 5 years ago, which in the grand scheme of things doesn't sound like a lot, but in an esports world, 5 years it was a completely different industry. The good news is nowadays there's a lot more hiring from outside esports. In fact, pretty much all hiring from outside esports, unless it's performance related. Back in the days, your ops person, your marketing person, all these things, they would all be esports people, esports people. That's changed. So you can come in as a professional straight into your area of the business. And with that, that 5-year gap, there's been such professionalization. So companies have expanded, more organizations have turned up, more non-performance organizations turn up, data companies, marketing companies, communication companies, things like that. So there's a lot more opportunity and a lot more opportunity for you to go directly as professional. You don't have to do this, what I call horrific grind, which, some of us had to do earlier on. And the thing I always say, and this is what I repeat whenever I get the chance to talk to someone who asks me, how do I get into esports? Find what you're good at, find where your passion is, irregardless of esports, where your talents are, what you like doing, what you work well at, and see how that applies to esports. And you will suddenly find that there are roles available, there are ways and gaps that you can add something in. For me personally, so my background, I studied engineering at university, and I've always had the enjoyment out of sort of running large scale projects, so as you can imagine, it's part of an engineering role. So I took that fact. Yes, I had to do a grind, which hopefully no one else has to do anymore, but eventually got the chance to transition into operations, which at the base of it is just doing continuous improvement projects for an esports company. So find what you're good at, apply it.
One of the things that I found so impressive about what you're doing specifically and EXCEL have taken on board is your analytical approach. I won't reveal anything too specific, but it came across very clearly that you're a bit of a numbers guy whilst taking into account every other kind of performance parameter you can think of. Is that something that's persisted? And specifically, I remember you said there's a 2-year plan going on in EXCEL.
Yeah, so
has that come into fruition? Has that changed since we last met?
No, it hasn't, which is great to hear. It hasn't. So we are actually just starting year 2 now. Year 1, we fell just short of the goals we wanted, but just short is still pretty good and pretty happy with it. But it is a 2-year plan that's effectively for anyone who's not aware, it's a 2-year plan from taking EXCEL of sort of the bottom of the table, which is where they started before I joined, up to qualifying for the World Championships, which is a top 3, top 4 placing. And what I realized when I came in is, we're not going to get that top position by doing what everyone else has done, because with the new team, we've had a really sort of struggling year. In their first year in the league, they struggled quite a lot, didn't do too well. So it's not like you could suddenly attract talent, couldn't suddenly throw money at the wall and everything would work. That was not the solution. So instead, I guess the best phrase, right, is a money ball approach. We put all our resources into a couple of data analysts, actually two American lads who came across and built what we're calling the EXCEL Performance Index, the EPI, which is basically this giant scouting tool for Europe, which, in my opinion, I know doesn't exist out there. So we're able to see the stats of like every single young European player out there in every league that perhaps other people don't have access to. And that's how we sort of designed our initial team. We've had to make iterations on the roster on the starting 5 players, which we knew we'd have to, because some of those young talents weren't available yet. But we are now going into year 2, and it's going to be interesting to see who we pick up as a result that fits into that 2-year plan and fits into that sort of scouting system.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was genuinely impressed by the table that you showed us on the level of analysis you guys do, both proactively and retrospectively. What it actually inspired me for the article that you saw in the journal, the International Journal of Esports, where we looked into physiological parameters. We had that conversation early on where I saw that there was so much potential there. What do you think that is something that we'll see in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as with any sport, you realize that as it gets more professional and you top tiers of competition, that you need I call them little win, sort of little percentage wins. You need every 1% can make a difference to your results. So if that means at our level that I don't know, doing heart monitor work, right, and seeing how their stress levels change over a match, and therefore you can address through sports psychology or pre-game or post-game how they manage that stress. Well, that sounds quite extreme, but that could be a 1% difference that again just makes that split decision better call in the match, which turns the game. I think the days of 5 players rocking up on their computers having eaten somewhat unhealthy food and just turning up and playing and would win just because of talent alone, those days have passed. And now, yes, talent's important, but it needs to be matched with the psychological aspects, the performance aspects, the physical aspects. All of this now matters because we have reached top tier performance and every percentage matters.
I completely agree. It leads me on to the more broader question of, do you think the larger teams and League of Legends and all the other major esports titles will privately or publicly start organizing research? Because that's what gets us academics excited, but it's still very quiet on that end. I think it will happen, or if not already. But what's your suspicion here?
I believe a lot of big, especially in America, big organizations with a lot of money behind them, they are doing that work. I think they're keeping it very private because right now so little exists that if you can get something out there, it's such a big jump and improvement and gap that you want to keep it to yourself as long as you can. I don't think we've seen it in the UK as much, and that's not down to not wanting. That's just down to because the UK esports market isn't as developed. There's not many organizations who want to be, who are at that level, who have the money behind them to produce research and articles. So I think it's like purely almost a logistics and availability thing. But in terms of Europe and especially America, that work is definitely happening, definitely, and they're keeping it quiet on purpose because, again, end of the day, everyone wants to win.
Yeah, and I think that's very understandable. I think the issue you've raised is something that a lot of different people, including the academics, need to work harder at. Whilst I think the confidentiality makes a lot of sense to avoid giving away competitive advantages, what it can also lead to is probably what's going on right now, which is a few individuals in positions of influence. That means that things don't really change as fast as they should. So an example would be, in reality, we know if you go down the research route, you'll focus on 1 to 2 areas. Let's say it's cardiac monitoring. You might not look into sleep and fitness, whereas another organization in America might do that. So the problem that will happen is you guys will think, wow, there is so much potential in cardiac monitoring. But when it comes to sleep and fitness, you just won't have the resources to look into that. So it will become a bit narrow field, the way I see it with this approach.
Yeah, I think that's definitely happening. I talk from experience with previous teams as well. Narrow research is definitely the issue. And of course, companies working together or sharing research doesn't happen because everyone's trying to keep it to themselves. It is a shame. It is a bit of just a result of the industry we're in. There aren't many teams, there aren't many competitors. Every position, you got one position in the table. It matters. If you look at the Premier League, there's 22, 24 teams in the Premier League, whereas in our league there's 10. So the difference between 5th and 6th is massive. So you really, really want to hold on to as much as you can. I do think slowly, as people have realised, changing the perception of esports is just as important. Research has a big part of that, not necessarily directly, but for us to say, go public and say, hey, we've been doing this research on physical health, and as a result our players are a lot healthier, and we can be public about that. That's obviously going to have a much more positive perception from the UK or whoever it is, from our fans on esports. So there are benefits to being public about it, but whilst the industry is still quite small, I think teams feel like there's not a lot to gain from sharing everything they're doing.
I think that's a fair response. Our job as academics will then be to sell it to you guys, to say, we're happy to get involved in this if we can find a middle ground on X, Y, and Z. And hopefully that's of mutual benefit. So I think you're right. It will be quite specific.
And that's how it's gone so far, because I know, again, from my own experience, a lot of the work that I've done with research companies has come from approaches to us, where it's been like, hey, we had this idea about esports and we went, oh, we didn't think of that. Why would we? And then obviously there's quite a mutual ground. There's only, I just know there's teams that are working on stuff that they've chosen to build, but ultimately, as a researcher, like approach us. I'm an ops guy, and we got a coach who's from League of Legends coaching, and I know we have a performance guy who's a former football professional goalkeeper, but there's only so much he's going to think about, right? So approach us and see if we can do something.
Well, on a similar note, going back to how we first met with the famous table by Grant, that'll be etched in my mind. But what I wanted to ask was, 1 year on, are you now more data intensive or less data intensive?
That's a good question. So I would say on a day-to-day in the performance division, we're more data intensive. We have done a lot more work in refining the data we provide to players and to coaches for sort of match to match, right? So sort of almost reports. That's where I've been seeing a lot of improvement for our data analysts. In terms of sort of the bigger picture, our scouting tools and other things, we are building new tools behind the scenes. So I guess in that sense, yes, we are hoping to become more data intensive. It may have only been sort of 8 months since we spoke. But these tools have taken a long time to provide. So I'm hesitant to say yes until I see the tools and how they do. But we're certainly trying to be, is the best way to put it.
And I think this will be very interesting for the academics in the audience. Where, if you can say, where have you got it wrong with the data analysis? Where have you just realized, no, that was the wrong direction. It didn't help us. It, in fact, probably made things worse.
I think I forget the phrase for it in the business world, but it's data for the sake of data is where we've gone wrong. Producing things for these sort of pre-match reports or post-match reports that just feel good because they look cool. Things like a heat map. Here's a heat map of where this opponent was, and you're like, okay, what do we do with that? Right. So that's the difference. It's data for the sake of data. A lot of analysts out there, unfortunately, do this. Is they produce these really cool maps or really cool graphs, and I think early on, were doing that a little bit. We were, producing stuff that actually wasn't giving us an advantage. You take one look at it and go, and then throw it to the side. And so it's been a lot more about refining. Especially as I say, especially our data, our match data. All right, this is genuine useful data. Not just say where they're generally sitting on the map with the heat map, but then converting that into, okay, but what does it actually translate to? Timings in the game, which means they're going to be at this position in the game or this position in the game, and that's going to result in this tactic. Like trying to take it that next step deeper that I think a lot of people don't necessarily do. So that's probably been our biggest learning. We were quite quick at changing it, but it did take 3-4 months to kind of realize it and actually make that adaptation.
Well, that's great. I think every data analytics person falls into this trap at one point or another. It's just something you can't help.
Exactly. It's so easy to fall into. The whole industry has done it from day one, because I promise in a year's time we'll be looking back at today and going, oh, we were producing that for no reason. Like it will always evolve. But what's important, I think, for us, I guess the main learning point is not just to copy the rest of the industry and what they're doing, but actually realize, the industry isn't very developed. There is a lot of room. We can do our own thing and be a leader, which I like to think we're very much doing.
And you've hit the nail on the head with another thing that's a big pain point for me, which is if you've decided on an intervention, you've got to really decide on a deadline for making a decision if it's made a positive difference, and then get rid of it if it hasn't, so you can move on. I don't think enough people finish that circle, as it were.
No, so I think a bit spoiled in esports because it's so fast moving. Esports at the moment, the growth is so ridiculous and people are expanding so much that you almost don't have time to stick to a project that isn't working. So actually sometimes it's nice to be like, right, we're going to try this for 3 months, and if it doesn't work, we'll call it a day. And in fact, after 1 month, you're like, no, screw it, ain't working, get rid of it. Like, we don't have time. So that actually is a slight benefit of being so fast growing with slightly limited resources. But it could also lead down the route of not trying new things or not trying to produce, I don't know, new tools or new data systems because you're wanting to rush so much on what you already have.
That's the big hurdle I think the academics will have to jump, which is how to find something that is not only interesting to esports organizations, but has plenty of growth, and by definition means it can fail or not realize the potential it was intended to.
Yeah, it's hard. It's going to sound so vain to say, and I'm sorry to researchers, academic researchers out there, but my biggest frustration, understandably, is having done some stuff in the past. People, they go, "I've got this idea for this research." I'm like, "That sounds cool." I get them the interviews with players, I get them the information they need, the data thing, and then I don't hear anything for 12 months.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, look, I understand it does take 12 months, but I'm sitting here in the performance side going, I need it now. So, that is definitely the toughest sort of part of working with, researchers who want to get it right and make sure everything's correct. And I'm just like, nah, let's just try it. So, yeah, I mean, it's just part of the game, right?
That makes me think about the next part, which is what has the response been for the players? When you say, "Oh, our data shows this," or perhaps you're not positioning right in during the middle of the game, for example, have they saw the data and been swayed, or have they been a bit more cynical and said, "Well, you've just made it look like that"? How has it worked out in the conversations?
I'll say for us, and I specifically EXCEL, that we get quite positive reactions to those kind of things, but that doesn't come out of good data or whatever it is. That's come out of, we have specifically tried to build this ethos from day one, right? That's part of our 2-year plan. So we've tried to get players who are very open-minded to new ideas and new techniques. We have this head of performance, Fabian, who I believe you're going to speak to, who he has brought in all these things around sleeping and nutrition and just anything you could think of that I think it's fair to say some other teams haven't tried to that extent. And as a result, we specifically tried to hire players who would fit into this model, to the point where, and I imagine Fabio talk about this because it was amazing to see, players are now competing in our team on who can sleep better with the system measure. So because of that ethos from day one, yes, for us, that has meant that when we come to them, we're like, hey, I've got this bit of data, I've got this bit of research, we've got this idea that's come out of esports. It's a bit left wing, it's a bit from non-traditional esports. Do you want to try it? Have a think. They will listen. What I will say is, historically, and I can say this from my experience of my previous teams, the players and or the coach will kind of be the gateholders to the game, right? No, I understand you've given me that data, but we've done this and we've played this a million times. No one knows the game more than us. So why would we look at that when in fact I just know it was this, right? So it's a lot of, the players and the coaches were the ones with all the experience at such a high level that nothing could beat it. Now the data's good enough mixed with those opinions and thoughts changing on the game, sorry, not the game, but like that sort of ethos of listening to new ideas. That's just changing slowly, which is really nice to see. It's a really positive thing to see.
You've got 5 people usually in a League of Legends team.
Correct.
Yeah. When you debrief and you look at performance, I'm sure you're going to look at team dynamics, communication, try and analyze that, look at harder endpoints like kills and deaths and whatnot. You've got different people doing different things almost all the time. And my question is, when you give feedback as a team, do you then, how does the individual feedback work as well? Do you give one-on-one and say, oh, we'd like you to work on positioning better or communication? And following on from that, do you then say, we recommend you do this? Or sometimes you just leave the player to their own devices to work out what to do?
Sure. So I won't comment on this in terms of EXCEL, but I'll use my experience in my previous team where we were building a very similar ethos, just so I don't give anything away. Okay. So at my previous team, you've kind of actually nailed it already. So, a day finishes, we would do a team feedback session. We do that after every practice game, as well as just in general at the end. We'd usually have a goal for the day and a goal for the week and everything you'd have as a team. But we also have one-on-one individual goals that would very much come out of data-driven reasons. Hey, we've watched you and we've got data showing you like to do this or you don't like to do this. So a lot of the data we use in terms of changing a player to improve is very much on a one-to-one basis. Whereas if it's as a team, as a 5, that's where it's much more around in-game communication, in-game decision-making, and the game itself, if that makes sense. So the data very much used on a one-on-one level, and that's what I like doing. And we build goals, we build objectives for each player as a result of pure data one-on-one.
Thank you, Grant. I've just got one last question for myself. I thought about it when you gave your summary at the beginning, which alluded to your passion for really building up the grassroots community in esports in the UK especially. Where do you think it's going, and what do you think should be happening here?
Just the esports in general.
Esports at a grassroots level in the UK.
Yeah. This is my bane, because this is all I want to work on, and I'm trying to find reasons, ways to talk about it. Currently, right now, it goes back to what I said before about education is going to be the biggest thing at a grassroots level, showing why esports can be a good thing in terms of working in a team or improving decision making or helping individuals sort of be more mature in leadership positions. So that's like very much current. So telling schools and people who work with their kids on game stuff that gaming and esports can be a positive benefit. Long term, as I said, it is an entertainment industry and it's a positive one. It is to be something that can rival sports, as something for people to support, something for people to choose to spend their money on because they enjoy it. A good economic impact for the country. It's those same things. It's going to take a long time to get there. A long time, and that's going to be infrastructures, facilities, professional leagues. I'm sure the government's going to get involved at one point. Things like the FIFA equivalent for esports, all those kind of things are going to be needed to reach that point. So for now, as I said, short term, changing perceptions, setting up opportunities in schools to understand what esports is about and that you can have careers in it, doing workshops where gaming and or esports is used as a positive. Just sidetracking, a lot of schools right now use Minecraft, the video game, as a way to teach coding for kids and a way to teach very basic lessons around how to use a computer. That's obviously one form of it, but there are definitely going to be extremes the other way in terms of how you as a group of kids go out and play football in PE, one lesson a week where you learn not how just to kick a football, but it is around leadership and it is around working together. That equivalent for esports, that equivalent for gaming, rather than just being a hobby at home that kids just go away and then, with respect, get very bad habits and, understand sort of very negative aspects to gaming, which they don't realize.
That was all my questions, Grant. Is there anything you wanted to talk about or discuss?
Honestly, no. That if you haven't picked up already, I just like talking about UK sports and what we can do, and all I ever hope that comes from interviews like this and these things, and to everyone listening, is that people realise that esports can be such a power for good. That whilst it may seem like gaming, sitting behind a computer, is a negative thing, I promise you, it can be way more positive than writing documents at work or whatever it is you have to do behind a computer. That this can be something you genuinely improve and learn from, and so not to just immediately throw it away as something negative because gaming's fun and just because gaming is a hobby. It can be such a powerful good for this country in so many different ways. And so just if there's any academics, researchers listening, think of ideas of how at the highest level you could help improve performance, but at the lowest level, how we could work on the grassroots and perception education side. And combined, hopefully UK esports can go very, very far.
What a brilliant way to end. Thank you very much for your time, Grant.
Thank you.